Hello, welcome back to another episode of our Mega-lo-Mania in Unreal Engine. So the last stream was on Wednesday, and since then I have done a few bits and pieces here and there, mostly related to either sorting out more sprites or dealing with some of the data. The main code change was to make the task that we had, this task widget, more consistent with the root task widget, given the root task widget did some things somewhat better than the older task. So predominantly related to kind of how it knows what it actually affects. So originally the task widget used to take a task type within the set task function, and that task type was used to determine what effectively what event was propagated to the player controller to determine whether it should increase the researchers or whether it should increase the builders or whatever it would happen to be moving forwards. The concept was that this task widget was generic and allowed allocation of population to lots of different tasks. But unfortunately it did that by requiring the task type. I didn't like that, and I much preferred the way I did with the root task, where it actually just propagates an event, this begin modified population and end modified population, and obviously the mouse leave. That's what it propagated outwards from the widget itself, and it was up to whomever created this widget to determine what should happen when those particular events were fired. So the task now also has begin mouse modify, begin modify population and end, and it also has mouse leave. That meant that we don't have to worry about what type it was within the task widget itself. So another change that I did was I did cut out and add these shields, which need to be better placed, but they're there. I've cut out the little game speed sprite, and I created a little animation flipbook just because I can. Not that the flipbook actually gets used, but it's there nonetheless. I also added a widget, where did I put it? In here, called the background, and if we run the game we can see just kind of faded in the background is kind of a screenshot from the DOSBox version of the game. It kind of helps me line things up, so I've almost adjusted the slate, as we've called it, to fit. It looks like the main menu fits well anyway. The research menu is not quite so good. Whether exactly where things are, obviously we've not used the right background for that, but I think the little man should obviously be a lot lower, and it should all come under the title. The title obviously remains the same place in all of them, so I need some just rearrangement there and some tweaking to a couple of the locations, like the map and the shield and the speed and all that, because I think the speed's actually off the screen as well. So some tweaking to do there. Another thing that I've done in relation to the data was that I actually found a really good resource where someone quite some time ago wrote a fairly in-depth guide to the game, and that guide included a lot of the underlying information, particularly related to the technologies, the resources, and that kind of thing. I haven't imported it all yet, but one thing I did add, I've created this data directory where all the structures and enumerations and data would go, but I've completed our islands. No, not that one. I did complete the islands, but I haven't uploaded that one yet. We've got the resources data table that lists all of the resources and their appropriate sprite. Obviously I've cut out the appropriate sprite. I haven't cleaned them up yet, they're still a bit off, but basically they're all defined, also including how you gather them, whether it's the surface, the deep mine, or the open pit. So that's all complete. That's tied to a CVS file. So we'll obviously go through that process that I've done with that, with all the other data sets. I think I've got another one that's complete. So the resource structure at the moment just contains a display name, a type, and a sprite. And obviously there's the name column, as we saw when we were in here, the name column used to actually identify them. And technologies in this context isn't complete, but I have actually got that, almost all of that data done. And technology category I haven't completed. So one of the more complicated data sets that I found was effectively the resources required to make the different technologies. So even if we take the fairly incomplete technology set here, we've got the stick, we've got the rock and the shield, and it turns out, based on this guide that I read, that certain technologies require certain combinations of resources, and that those resources that they require are static. So but the many things can make certain different technologies. So we can kind of see that if we research the rock within the actual game, done quickly. Down again. So if we go to our blueprint, we can see that we've got the rock blueprint, and we can see that it takes 1.5 stones. Now, the gathering of these resources, things that are gathered from the surface, their income per kind of game tick is determined by how many people are not assigned to anything, which is kind of contrary to how everything else works. But it means that those unassigned people actually have a task. But that rock takes 1.5 stones, and all these things that I can research here take a combination of stone and slate, which is why I can research them. Once you advance the tech level and you get the open pit, or later on the mine, that gives you more resources that would unlock the full set of technology, depending on the resources of the sector. And to kind of try and accommodate all of that information, I've created from the guide again, that I'll definitely reference as a source in some about me page or something on this task, on this project. But this information contains, or this JSON file contains, all the technologies and all of the recipes required to make them, based on that guide. And we can see if we find the rock, so it says that it should be able to create it with 1.5 bones, rocks or wood, which obviously does align with what we see within the blueprints here. 1.5 rocks or stone, whatever you want to call it. So we can pick another one, like the bow and arrow is one of the weird ones, because the guide actually says it doesn't take anything, but it must take something, otherwise you'd have an unlimited amount of them. So it's going to take a little bit of time, so we'll let that go in the background. So I haven't seen how all these line up with the actual resources per sector, but I have got that data. So we'll just open it up. So we have here a spreadsheet of all of the islands. So they've got their name, which is the kind of index of that data table. We've got our display name. This represents the epoch. I think epoch as a kind of integer number. So tech level maybe. Then we've actually got the epoch, the biome, and how many opponents that level has. So our bow and arrow is actually done now. So if we jump over here, in this case it takes 1 rock on half a slate. So I'll add that to my sheet. Because it must take something. And perhaps it just wasn't known at the time, or perhaps it's slightly different. So now that gives us the sun element, solarium. So if we look here, we can see that it's used by quite a few different things. If we look for a scenario where, there we go, so the pike requires solarium and slate, which we've got slate, but we also have the pike, so it must take us another combination that we already have. So it doesn't look like it's 100% accurate, because it looks like we have access to the pike, yet we don't have the resources that this sheet says. But I think the guide was written based off what was available in the SNES version of the game, so there perhaps is quite a few differences, but conceptually it works out quite well, and obviously this can be tweaked and updated and corrected where necessary, so that inevitably this will be pretty correct. Obviously if I was going to start from scratch with this data, it's safe to say that it would have taken quite some time to extract it, so having that guide is definitely useful. So the pike says that it takes stone and slate, which according to this isn't a recipe, but we'll add it. So this JSON file is fairly big. I haven't imported that into the game yet. I did not mean to press escape. I've done that too many times. We also have, as I say, the islands here, but the more interesting one is the sectors. So this one includes effectively details of every sector on every island across every level. So we've got something like the very first level, effectively with 2 spaces. We have the location, counting from the top left, effectively clockwise, or no, through the rows and columns. We also have what will be the vector location of each of the different buildings, when applicable. Obviously there's no laboratory or factory on quite some of the early ones, so they'll be NA, but otherwise they'll have the details there. And then in relation to the technology and the resources, we have the resources available on that sector. So we'll just jump back into the game. And this is the resources that we're going in location 6, which is the higher up one here, and we can see that it should have those 4 resources, and we can see that it definitely starts with rock and slate, and we know that solarium was there. Obviously to get the higher up ones, we'll have to research them independently. What we'll do is we'll just again set that off, come back to it. So this is incomplete because I haven't got all the locations of stuff, but it does have all the resources for each different map. Islands, we have the resources that we've seen that's been imported. Technology, this is complete up to dealing with the sprites, because it turns out that each technology actually has 4 different sprites depending on quite where it's positioned, where it's used. So there's a sprite for the lab, a sprite for the offensive menu, a sprite for the factory when applicable, and a sprite for the information, which is shown when we show it up here in the top corner. So there's 4 sprites. I've only extracted 1. Need to do some renaming and organizing to sort that out. Obviously research time's incomplete. That should be 1980. So we definitely have all the names, all the display names, the categories and the epochs. They're all complete and correct. And whether it's manufactured or researched in the lab is also correct. And that's based on, again, the guide simply stated that certain things after a certain epoch level are made in the factory or are researched in the lab. So that's dead easy to get. Again, another sheet for the buildings. Need to fill in their sprites. But this building's on each of the epochs. And this is just the URL that I got all that information from. So it's a guide on IGN written quite some time ago. Well, that's the name of the game. I don't think it actually had a date where it was written, but yeah, so very detailed guide about everything about it. Some of it's kind of opinion on this is how you should play or this is what you should do, but a lot of factual information that I've basically imported into these. So we're going to take our islands, because this one is complete, and we can export this as a CSV even, comma separated values file, and let's reorganize. So we'll drop this in here and then in here. So we can see that that's pretty much the table. Can't really see what's what when it's in a text file, but that's all of the display names, island name, epoch as an integer, epoch as the kind of name string thing, the biome and their opponents. And so we've gone up a tech level by researching the bow and arrow, but we'll just set off the pike as well. Try and get up to the level so we can unlock the last resource, make sure it matches our data. So we actually have a table for the islands. Now originally the islands table had the map, and the map we used to render the mini map, and obviously that map to the slate view. But rather than referencing things by this kind of row column system that we were doing, in the new table, in the sectors, I've actually referenced them purely by an index location on the map, and we'll see why I've done that and work through that probably in a later episode. But we're actually going to replace this data table with our new data, and therefore we need to update our island structure. So you have to be able to import it, you have to create a structure, pretty much as you have to do to create the data table in the first place. And the structure has to, as best as is possible, map to the data. So far as I've seen in the previous one or two that I've done, if it doesn't map, it just ignores it, and you lose that data. In the case of importing the technologies where, sorry, which one did I do? The resources where it has a sprite, if the sprite doesn't exist at the path that's specified, it'll actually just clear that value and it won't reference anything. So it's quite easy to see if there's a mistake and how to correct it. So we know the structure of this needs to be different. We have the name, obviously we don't deal with, but we have a display name. I'm just going to change them as they are. So that's text. Text is the key differences between the string text and name. Based on what I've read, text is localizable, as the hover hint says, so it can be translated. String's good for string-based operations, so finding bits of the string, chopping up the string, appending strings together, that kind of manipulation. And name is more of a kind of static value that you give to something that doesn't change, and also names are case insensitive for comparison's sake. So a capitalized word is the same as a completely lowercase word, or vice versa. So names are good to kind of index something, to give something a static, referenceable, consistent name. Text is where you want it to be display name, or translated. And a string is, as I say, for other string manipulation. So our display names are always text, and our text level is going to be an integer. Our epoch, so in this case the epoch is a name, because it's going to represent a kind of consistent value for the epochs throughout the game. Whether the epoch should become an enumeration or not, I haven't kind of decided whether that makes sense or not. So at the moment I'm just going to have them as names. The biome is going to stay as the biome enumeration because we've already defined that. And finally our opponent's value. So we don't have to worry about any of the defaults. Save that structure. So we've updated the structure, the table has just changed. Any data in the columns that used to be something and now is something else is gone. So you definitely have to be careful if you modify the structures. I think even so far as to say we've got tech level that's currently defaulted 213, which is not correct. But if we change that to something that's not 123, as soon as you change it, the data's gone. If we change it back, you've lost it completely. So you definitely have to be careful when changing the structure, because you effectively immediately lose the data. It does seem to mark it as edited, so perhaps you can reload it, undo changes. Yeah, so you can undo the changes, so that's not too bad. You can at least get them back. Nonetheless, so now the way that I imported the data was actually to do import to and then select the appropriate data, choose the structure and say import as data type. You can import as a few different things, but data table, sorry, is what we want in this case. Click OK, and that's why it's got the fairly long name. I think I can change the name once I've done it, but the key thing once you've done that is that you can open the data table up, you can see, yep, that looks all correct, everything's fine. But if later on you change some of the data, we can go into our text editor or re-download it from the Google spreadsheets, which is where it was before, or however you update the data. And we'll just add some numbers onto the end of that, for example, and we save it. So now it's been modified, updated. We can see that obviously the data is not updated here, but if we right click, we can do re-import, and that actually reloads the data and updates our data table with those changes. So it's really useful to have the data in some kind of external tool where manipulating that data is easier than doing it here. And the editor for Unreal isn't so bad, but adding this amount of rows, which is only 29 rows, wouldn't be particularly quick. It doesn't look like, because I've obviously imported the data, I'm actually able to edit it directly. Nope, none of the editing buttons actually work. So once it is tied to an external file, it is actually tied to that external file, which is quite good. Kind of keeps that system in place, so you kind of make sure that your external data is consistent with your game data. I've got rid of our 1, 2, 3. And we do need to get rid of the original islands, but I think we're actually using them in various places, so we'll have to get rid of them moving forwards. But that's how you import data. It's now tied directly with the information from the original source file that we've got. So we'll get the sector information as well. So it might be better for me to organize this a little cleaner and put them into a folder, consistently name them, all that kind of stuff, but I will do that again once I've kind of certain on the process that's going on here. So we're now doing the data for the sectors. So open that in the editor. Oops. When it's ready. There we go. And we need to create our data structure under blueprints. So we call this singular because the structure represents a single sector, not all of them. And obviously we haven't completed our data, but we've certainly got enough of it. So the first one is, yeah, so the sectors don't really have a display name. They don't have a name at all, really. We do have, or what I've called the index, and that's just kind of an index of basically, again, counting the sectors within a given map. I'm not sure that this is actually going to be useful in any way, but it is in the data table for the time being, so we'll use it. Location is, again, that's actually the kind of I guess the actual programmatically countered space in the minimap. So the one that's selected, for example, counting from 0 is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's the selected areas, the 5th area. That's how that's kind of going to work. And that's relevant later once we get to actually re-rendering the minimap with this data. So the island name, we're just going to call it island. We have the castle location. So the location is actually going to be a vector because we want the x and y. There is a vector 2D, I think. There we go, vector 2D, which actually just has x and y. We could use that, but because we actually end up using the x and z and the y is consistent, and we may need to vary that y for the depth to make sure it's rendered in front of other things, a standard vector's suitable and probably going to be better moving forward. So we've got the location of the mine, location of the factory, laboratory, and so the resources, it's actually just going to be the name of the resource as an array, so nothing particularly fancy. That's just an array of the resources, and that's represented in the CSV file and on Google Docs as simply a single value, which is within brackets, comma separated the names. So that will unpack itself into the array within this context. So we save that, import sectors. So we actually have 2, don't know which one it is, going for the second. Nope. Let's try that again. Assuming the order's in the same order, we'll go for the first. Okay, so I think that's okay, because that's just saying that whatever values in the columns for the locations is not going to fit in a vector. Otherwise it looks fine. Yeah, so to avoid those errors, I'll fill the spreadsheet with basically just empty vector values. And the way they define them in the CSV, we can basically figure out what to populate a CSV file with, or effectively our Google Docs sheet, by exporting the data table. So if we save that as an export, we can open that back up in our editor, and we can see that what they actually have here is a bracket again, but they have kind of a key equals and then the value. So opposed to the array, which is literally just a bracket, and then they actually have double quoted the values, but that's probably just because of the method is exported. But that's just comma separated. For an actual structure, which a vector is, they've kind of named each variable with an equals. So far as I know, you can kind of take this to any depth. So you can have an array of objects which have their own arrays of objects and so on and so forth. But within a CSV file, the textual version of that would be very complicated. So probably want to try and avoid those kind of scenarios. But I can copy that as we have it, put it into the Google Docs, apply it to all of my sectors, so that firstly I won't get that error again, or those warnings again when I import it, but secondly so I can actually populate it correctly moving forwards. But filling in that, there are in total 209 sectors across all of the maps, etc. So filling in that information is going to take some time. So what we have now is a completely different definition of our islands, this one here, opposed to that one there, which is actually our old definition but with new structure, so it's completely useless in its current form. A full definition of resources and a full definition of our sectors, excluding the actual well, actually our island didn't work either. Why did our island not work? So if we go back to our sectors, that needs to be a name. So now we've changed that data type. Obviously they've all defaulted to none, but I think if we re-import it, we get the same errors for the location, but it does fill in nicely the island name there. So that's all we had to do. So in this case, the index that I've got, or the name column, sorry, to be more specific, is literally just an incrementing number, because there's no scenario that I can think of where I'm going to need to get a specific sector by any known name. And we're going to actually try and use this data now. So one thing that we've done with regards to our menu, let's see what, yeah, minimap does not like anything, so we're going to have to redo the minimap. Oh, it didn't like it so bad that it crashed. Crashed the entire editor. Okay. So we're going to try and use the data that we've got, obviously, to firstly stop it crashing. And I think the key thing don't think the minimap really changed, so we'll skip the restore. See where we are with that. So that looks fine. Yeah, so looks like everything that we were doing worked anyway, but we definitely have to go and stop the mini-map trying to use our invalid data, basically. Yeah, so it's trying to use a map that just doesn't exist anymore. So we'll break that link. We don't want that link. The biome we can keep because that's just a different property, but again we need to basically just take them all out. I think it's going to change quite a bit once we go through this anyway, so just get rid of the errors. Hopefully, yep, stop it crashing, but there's no rend there. That's okay. So the level itself, the kind of from the Unreal context, we've called it game as it stands. The level itself should represent a single island, and one way or another, of which I don't really know how specifically it will work, but one way or another the game level will be told which island the player is on. And from that we need to load the sectors that the player will have access to, and then from that we can load the minimap. So the game itself, blueprint from up here, this is the blueprint for the actual level. It handles changing the menu because it's at the kind of most upper level. We may move that into some kind of parent widget potentially, but at the moment it's here. And we handle left mouse button. What were we doing here? Yes, so this was clicking on things, particularly the minimap, I think. But doesn't look like we do anything with that anymore either. But that's, we'll leave that as is for now. But the level has an island, as it already had, nicely enough, and has a begin play event. So the begin play event, set the camera, and then at the moment it creates this background widget, which is the one, the kind of faded picture we see in the background. That's so I can line things up. So that's kind of like debug only style stuff that we'll remove later on. And then it binds to the selected event of the minimap. So we'll definitely kind of have to rework that. It sets the island. Yep, on the minimap. So it tells the minimap which island we're on, and then it sets the menu to the root menu. That was done quite some time ago. Now, when this loads, we actually want to get, so we'll create another function, and we'll just move the camera setup, not that there's a lot to it, but the camera setup into a set camera function, just so that that's out of the way. Because we know we want to do that, and we only really want to do it once, and it needs to take as little room as possible. Once we set the camera, we want to then figure out the sectors that we have for this map. Now, we're going to assume that one way or another, the island's been set, and we can don't know where we can get to those that kind of information as it stands, because there's no details on the level of the game itself. That's okay. So we have the island Maybe it's no, just seeing if there's a way to kind of edit this, because we can say so we want to make it editable from the instance, so that whoever creates this level, moving from the previous part of the games, which would be the kind of the screen just after this, can set it. So variable expose when spawning, that sounds like a useful one. So while we don't have multiple levels now, how would we do that? Open level. Don't know if that's the one we wanted. Just seeing what that checkbox that we just checked was. But I haven't actually got to the point of transitioning from effectively one level to another yet. So I don't know what the call is. No, I don't know. Never mind. Point is, now we've got this set on the spawn, then in theory, when you create an instance of this level to display, we should be able to expose or set the level as it's created, which will be fairly neat. So from the level exposed here, we want to get from the sectors data table all of the get data table row, so that will get one, that will get all of the rows. Columns of strings. So anything else that's useful here? No, so see what we can do to a data table, if anything. No, so it's just looked like we can get them by name. That's okay. So this will give us all of the names. It looks like it's the only way to really iterate over a data table. We'll come back over here. And sectors. So that's going to give us all of this column, which is the whole 200 odd items. And from that, we actually only want to pick out the sectors that apply to this map. So in this case, we want a sector. We've got two. Let's see if we can find out where the other one is and rename it. So we can go to the top level of content, search for sector. So there we have a sector in the game and a sector in data. Okay, so this one was our sprites data. Yeah, so we need to rename this. We may, or very likely will need this information later on. Because I don't think no, it's not complete. but it does tell us various information about the sector. So we actually want to rename this one for the time being. Map component and map components. That'll do for now. Now we won't get confused with sector and sectors. So from our sectors data table, we want to define an array of sectors. Now effectively we just need to iterate using this function, so for each will we know when we're done? We might know when we're done. No, we won't. Okay, actually we will. Let's see if we can do that. So one thing that we want to try and avoid doing is iterating over all of the 200 odd rows every time. I mean, to be fair, iterating over 200 rows shouldn't actually take a great deal of time. So it's probably not worth the effort. We can always optimize it later. So we'll iterate over them all. Now, for each of the elements, so in this case we're only going to get the name. So now we've got the name. We want to get the data table row. It would be nice, I think, if there was a way to just iterate over the data table rows rather than having to get all the names, then iterate over the names, but nonetheless, sectors. Let's just move that over a bit more. So for each of the row names here, and the row name in this context is literally just going to be this incremental value, so that's no use to us aside from getting that sector row object. And what we've got is our array here, and we want to put into that array any rows that match our island name. This one here. So we can split our row there, and that saves having that extra pin to split it explicitly. And we want to say, does that equal? We'll put them the other way around, that way. And branch. And if it's true, we want to add to an array. So again, we just shove those out the other way. Array is that one. Okay, so now we split it, we don't actually have the whole thing anymore, so we do want that separate pin in this context. So we'll just break that connection, then we can fold up or recombine the structure and break it on a separate pin, a separate node, sorry. Move them over a bit more. So we do the same check, but now we've got access to the sector again, we can add it to that array. So that's really all we need to do to start with. That's going to mean that once the level is loaded, our array should contain the amount of sectors for that map. So over here, over on our for each, we have this completed execution node pin. And what we'll do is we'll just print out on the screen how many sectors we have. Not set. Get. It's basically straight to screen. And play. So it says 2. So if we go back over here and we'll pick a completely different map, one that we haven't used before. This one here sounds good. Back over to the game. We'll change the name and play. We have 14, and that's correct. It should be 14. So our little iteration here finds all of the sectors. Let's get rid of all that. So that, again, we'll just drop that into a function. Otherwise this graph's going to be huge if we keep adding logic like that. So this will be set island sectors. See, that's initializing the menu, so we'll just keep that for the time being. Jump over here, make sure that it's all aligned correctly. Make sure it's all correct. Yep. So that sorts out our sectors, and now we've got our array of sectors, which is just arrays of these. We want to what's the next step? Next step probably will be fixing that mini-map, because that's really our representation of, are we looking at the right map? And that opens up quite a few little things that we can do just to verify our data. So the mini-map wants to know about the sectors. I don't think the mini-map needs to know about the island as a whole, at least not at the moment. So we can go back to our primary event graph here, and currently our mini-map is a actor. Again, kind of going back to what we had before, but it's never really felt like it should be an actor. So now I've kind of had some experience with creating the UI for the menu system. It seems that the correct approach would be to make the minimap the UI widget that I started with. So this is obviously what I had before, where we've got a canvas panel of some random specific height. So we'll just reset that back to whatever it should be, so it doesn't really matter. And in the canvas panel we have, well, they seem to disappear at certain zoom levels, we have all 14 image spaces. And based on what we've done before, we've named them based on their appropriate row and column. So 0, 0 is column 0, row 0, all the way down to 3, 3, which is right at the end. And we've applied an image to those places. Now all of those should be anchored to the top right hand corner and size to content. So we can see that they do overlap a little bit, but that's correct. They need to overlap to make sure they actually join. The visibility is set to hidden, so we'll create it so that they're all visible. And then we'll go to the game. So in the game we create the widget for the background, and then we tie up the minimap selection, and then we set the island on the minimap. So all of that is unnecessary. And that's just changing the menu. What we'll do here, because these are kind of not related tasks that we need to do here, we'll actually make the background widget the last thing we do, because it's kind of our debugging, just for informational purposes type of widget that we've added. I don't know where we've added the menu widget. We don't add it here. That's left mouse button on. That was for handling the minimap stuff. So I'll change menu. So in the change, so in the change menu we actually define which menu it should be. So that's that function there. That's okay. So we'll set the menu second, and then firstly we'll set up the minimap. Now the minimap really is just going to be a create widget call, and the class will be our minimap widget, and then we'll add it to the viewport, basically as we've done numerous times before. We'll see what that looks like. Not great. So we need to find our actor minimap, and we'll make that hidden in game and then hide it in the editor as well, so we shouldn't get anything there. So now we've got to sort out why we can't see the actual minimap itself. I'm going to take another image so that we've got something to move around, and just basically see if we can get something to show up. Because it was all the issue that we were having at the first time was just the general positioning of it and the size of it. So that image is being positioned somewhere down the bottom, of our screen. So anchor that to the top right. See where it puts it now. So it doesn't put it anywhere. Anchor it to the middle. So it says the middle way over there. So let's have a look at what we did for our actual UI widget, because the root menu positions itself basically in the ideal location. So our primary canvas in this case effectively doesn't have a specific size, it's just screen size and fit screen. Or screen size is 720 in this case. Don't think that makes any difference, but we'll make sure that they're the same here and here. The DPI is the same in both cases. I think the DPI is kind of consistent across all widgets everywhere. So why? So when I did the background one, that one actually fits well. We put the image down with half the size of it, and that just works. So I think what we'll do, to see if we can get to the bottom of this, we'll create a new blueprint. We'll just call it the map, and in that we'll add our one image of any one of the island sectors, and canvas panel. Oh, no. Our image will size the content, and then you can just blank out those two. We'll anchor it to the top right, and then blank out those values. And in our game, we'll create our map widget instead. So that actually puts the mini-map icon pretty much exactly where I thought that it should be. So we know we actually need quite a few of these. So we'll drop 3 more in. Again, we'll just pick any old map piece. Size the content again. Need to put the grid down to 2 at the least. So obviously it would be better to position these if I were picking useful map pieces. So I'll try and pick one that's just straight on the top one, this one, that one there. Let's put 20. Oops. Put another one in. 20. Yeah, as easy as it was picking some random ones, it was never going to help us in the long run. So now we can position those. So they all need to be anchored to the top right, effectively. And that should, if we play that now, stop and play, give us all 4 across the top. So that's fitting correctly. So copy, paste them. So when we paste them, it actually just pastes 4 things all on top of each other. But that's okay. We can find the appropriate sprite. So this time we just want something on the right hand side. We want something on the left hand side. And then we want 2 in the middle. I think there's a snow one for in the middle. So that's 22. And copy and paste. So obviously it's just thrown them somewhere, but at least they're all the same images. So paste them 4 again. Get that final row. So I don't know really what the difference is between this mini map that is actually displaying things in the right place and the other one, but obviously we made the other one quite some time ago. A lot of settings have changed since then, so maybe something else is just configured differently. Much easier to just recreate it. Everything now is in the right place. If we play it, we get a full map. So we just take off the background. So we'll break that. I think it just blurs things a little bit. Now we can see clearly that our full mini map is correct. It's colourful, but it's correct. And the position of it is correct as well. We can kind of verify that if we show just the 2 islands that we need for to match the background image, but we'll work for that next. So now we've got the mini map working in context of being displayed, we can deal with these images. Now before, we basically named these images various things, but the issue was that getting the image that we wanted to update the actual sprite seemed a bit awkward. We had to get the object name and match the object name, and it explicitly said that you shouldn't use the object name for anything really. It's kind of like debugging at best. So another solution that I've came up with is, firstly we need to make all of the images variables. I don't know if doing them all at once would work. It does seem to. And then secondly, we just want to name them consecutively depending on where they are. So I don't know why the numbers go so crazy. I think there's a mechanism where it assigns default numbers based on the widget, but if you have an image and you just move it around, it's constantly recreating it, and that's why we get like 138 and then 382, given how I've done it. But in our case, we just want to call them really simple names, and the names aren't necessarily important for what we're going to use them for, or use the kind of image widgets for. But obviously, if we have them well named, then it's going to be easier in the end. And I've just been randomly naming them 1, 2, 3 all the way down, and that's not even the right order. So 0 is correct, 1's correct, 2's correct, 3 is correct, 4 is not correct, so I'll move 4 down, 5, 6, so 6 is there. So that's actually 6, 5 is correct, but that should be 4, that should be 6, 7 there. So luckily, based on the way we copied and pasted them, they're not actually in like a terrible order. But this is just so really, from the variables, we can kind of see what's what, where they actually are. Just to make sure really we get the next bit right. And the next bit is basically going to be applying those to an array within our graph. So we want to create a variable which is an array of hopefully widgets. That one, hopefully. Now, I haven't tried this, so really just gonna see if it works. Because these aren't in an array or easily referenceable, we're gonna basically add all of them to this array, one after another. It's definitely gonna tidy it up. So we'll do the first row, so all the way up to 3. Have to tie them up in the right order. So it's possible to add a widget to an array of widgets, but you can't do it the other way around because it makes the pin specific. But that's okay. So tie up the array first, then our image. The array first, then our image. So that gives us the first, effectively the first row. Now, to test this, we want to get from an array a reference will be fine. So from that array, we'll get the first array node. Yeah. Let's get it again and set it at the end just to make sure we're modifying it correctly. Okay, so this needs to be cast to image. Get reference. That one there. 0. After we set, we come back over here. Make sure we do that so that if this idea fails, we can see. We want to make a brush from sprite. So this is basically the same principle we've done in many other places. And yeah, so at the moment we don't have the sprite, we don't have the sectors, which is the easiest way to do this. So our sprite for the sector we want is in our sector sprite table that we created or looked at earlier over here. Map components, not the actual one, so the data table. So the map component has all the sprites. So what we did in this data table, or what we were attempting to do, although didn't quite complete it, is define kind of a name for each of the different types of map components. The Boolean values represent if you can effectively enter from those directions, and then the array maps to the biomes. So the first item in the array is for the first biome, and so on and so forth. It might be better, perhaps if we can, see if this works. So to create a map, I can't do a map of dictionary really. So it's a paper sprite, and we want a map paper sprite on this side, and a biome. Yeah. So that might be better moving forwards. So now, if we add something to our better sprites array, we can say what biome it is. So we can say desert, because this is right there. This is for the top, bottom, right, left. So this you can enter in every case. So you can just find all of the top, bottom, right, left ones. And if I actually named all the sprites correctly, it would be easy to find it, and we can then specify snow. And we can use the enum value to get from the map later on, so that might actually make it a bit clearer. Assuming that this data structure and what we're doing works. For the time being, just because we want to test this area, we want to get a data table row. We want to use our map components, which we were just looking at here. We're going to say our current minimap, this one here, and we're going to redo this one. So this one's currently a, I think that's volcanic, as I've called it, a volcanic corner, accessible by the right and the bottom. So if we go to our right bottom, that one there, we've actually filled in the sprite for snow, which is good because our particular sprite we're using is not snow. So we'll use this one and the array at position 3. So we want right bottom, that one, and split the structure, which gives us an array of sprites. We want to get by array get a reference, no, copy, whatever. So we're getting ID 0, which is not correct. We want ID or index 3, so we'll just change that to 3. That gives us the sprite, which we then set over there. I'm going to set the size 16 by 16, I think. Oh no, 22 by 22 in this case for the map part. And then set image here. No, set brush, sorry. Set brush to that. So hopefully, if we run this, we get an error. Oh yeah, because the image needs to be done. That one should tie up. Use the wrong set brush. So we drag that, set brush. Nope. Fortunately, there's two set brushes. Target as image, target as border. We want target as image. Take that one in there. Next to it, so it's clear that they are one or the other. So hopefully, now what? Array. Pin is invalid. Why? Okay, so we don't actually iterate through here, which we probably should. So if the cast succeeded, we want to go in there. If the row is found, we want to go over there. Should be correct, yes. So we needed to actually execute that to initialize the array correctly. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so the end result of this should be, if everything is correct, image 0, which is currently it's already changed it because we've tied it up to our pre-construct. It's just gone and done it, which is good because it kind of shows that it works. If we just break that, break link to add, and we'll just tie it up there instead, we can see that if we compile, it goes back to brown, and if we go play, it goes to white. So everything there is working as we wanted it to. So there's a couple of things to do. We need to apply all of our 15 images or 14 images into our array. That allows us to get them really quickly. And then we actually need to apply the right map piece to the sectors. Now, what I didn't do, somewhat intentionally, within our sectors data, if we reopen it for reference, I added the location where in the effectively where in the minimap it is, so 6 and 10. So we can use that to set the image on the appropriate image. But what I didn't add is the effective map component. Now whether I need that or whether I can do it better, I haven't quite decided. Obviously using it would probably be the quickest approach, but kind of looking toward making random maps, perhaps not completely random because they may be unplayable, but some element of that. And I think tying down the component in the way that this currently was built up would make that quite difficult. I'd like it to say, well, if something's at location 6, what map piece should that be, given the biome? Now obviously we only have certain pieces for certain biomes at the moment, but if it was possible to create a full set of each biome, then we could create a full map or any map in any biome. And it would be nice to say, well, if location 6 is taken and location 10 is taken, they connect basically bottom to top, and therefore it should be this component and that component. That's kind of what I'd like. But we'll probably skip the map creation and kind of go for a slightly easier approach for the time being. But what we can do is we have got within our map, or we can get a function, that's what I'm looking for, or a variable to tell us what the sectors are. So we want a new variable. It's already an array, but of array of widgets. So we actually want that as an array of sectors. We want expose on spawn and instance editable, just kind of so it's got the right kind of interface for it, and that's just going to be sectors. Compile that. So when we go back over to our level, we create our background. That's not the one we want. We create our widget here, so we create our map. So it doesn't look, despite the fact we say expose on spawn, there doesn't seem to be a pin that represents that. So I don't know quite how that works, or whether it even does work. But we definitely know that we can call a function on the widget anyway. So we'll add a widget here. Sorry, a function. We're just going to call it render map. Yeah, I think render map works. And that's going to take our sectors array. Oops. Got there in the end. An array. And pass it by reference. And it's actually just going to set our variable here, because we're going to need it more than once. Just refresh the so hello Dirt Sleeper, welcome. And yes, you were right. As soon as I recompiled it, it's there. Excellent. So it's right there straight away. So we still need to call the function, but it's just slightly cleaner to do it this way. So this is our level. We already have found all the sectors in our set island sectors function. Now the level may actually not need the sectors. Does the level need the sectors? Yeah, the level will need the sectors because the menu shows the thing specific for that sector. So we do need it. So setting it in there makes sense. We may be able to return it from here and tie it up to there, but if we did that, it wouldn't be clear that set island sectors was setting it as a variable, so it might be a little bit cleaner to do it this way. But now we can pass it straight in. That makes that a lot nicer. We don't have to we still have to call the function for it to actually do something if we wanted to change the sectors after the fact, but we don't actually have to call the function from this perspective anymore, and that does make it a lot nicer. So we will remove that argument, remove the set. We'll keep the render map, but we'll call that. So this is all the setup that we need to finish, but at that point, this is kind of rendering the map. Well, it will be. So we'll dump this in here. So we'll need I like it to be all organized. All of those. Again, we have to make sure we tie up the array first, otherwise the array pin is auto-defined as something incompatible with our array in the end. So tie up the array. Thanks again. Make array. Oh yeah, that will be cleaner. Okay, so let's do that then. So I think we would again probably need to set that first before we put all these in. No, not that one. set that one first. Should be able to pull them in. Excellent. Yep, that's going to look a lot nicer. 3. We can just drop that straight over the 4. So go all the way down to our 14th piece. 15th. It is correct. But did I count wrong? No, there is 15. Never mind. It's getting a bit late. So hopefully 8. So obviously by naming our images it makes this quite straightforward because it's just 13 to 13 and so on and so forth. So hopefully minimal chance of mistakes. We can align all of these and it's the right one, distribute vertically. So a bit cramped up, but that'll do. I'm not gonna waste time sorting that out. So we want to do this on the pre-construct, call that one there. Straighten, delete that. Okay, so that's set up our array really neatly. Thanks for that. And then we want to call, drag the tab out then, not the, I was thinking of dragging the function, but that doesn't work from that direction. Render map is our next call. So now with the render map, we have the sectors and we have all the images. We don't know, again, we don't know what map piece to use for each of the sectors at this point. Gonna have to either put together all the logic to figure that out based on the location and what's next to it. That's the kind of ultimate solution, or modify my sectors data table to actually include it, because each one is listed here. It should be fairly simple to say this location 6 in this map is this component, but it's quite a tedious task to populate 200 of them like that, which is why I haven't done it yet. Kind of hoping that I don't have to, but the logic might take just as long. Even though the logic's better, the logic, it may even take longer. So anyway, that's what we'll try and do later. For now, we're just going to get it to change something based on the map that we have, based on the map we have. So I think the easiest thing to do is, at the moment they're all set to visible because we wanted to see them while we were putting them down, but realistically they should default to non-visible, hidden, because we don't want all of them showing anyway. Very few maps. I think only one map fills the whole thing, and that's the very last map. So this will be a clear way. So the map pieces aren't going to look right, but we can show the right ones. Within our map graph, we want to iterate over our sectors, and each element we want to break it, because that gives us our location. And again, we'll just move this out of the way. And for each of our locations, we want to get from our images array get doesn't like getting by reference very often, but oh well, we are going to change it anyway, I suppose, so it's probably more correct. We want to get that location, and then with that image we want to set visibility to true. I'll just tie that up. Probably pick the wrong set visibility again. Widget set visibility. There we go. And we want to set it to visible. So hopefully when we play this we should see a map that looks like the map should be, but with pieces missing. So that actually looks about correct. I don't know 100% if it matches that, but I did copy all the sector information, so I'm fairly confident that will. We can pick one of the starter ones. This Celia is quite a good one because it's got quite a good shape, distinct shape to it. So we go all the way back to the level and we change it just once here, and we've got a completely different shape. And now if we go into our original game and select the same map, we can see nicely enough that it's the same shape. So I'm quite pleased with that. And on that good note, I'm going to stop before I break it. But yeah, so definitely still quite a bit of work to do. Need to figure out what actual map piece to use. Need to figure out how best to do that, whether it is going to be easier to just hard code them into the sector data table for now. But that means I have to go through and look at each map, but it's probably going to take about an hour or so to fill in all that data. Ideally I'll add logic later on that allows it to know which map piece to use, or under which biome. So that will be the ultimate goal. But I mean, considering where it was before, how it used to piece it together, the code for this minimap version 2 is significantly cleaner than minimap version 1. So not only was it not a widget in our first, well, in one of our first iterations, it was this actor here. This actor did a whole bunch of stuff to actually get that correct, depending on all the conditions that it has before. Now we still need to handle user interaction with the images or user interaction with the minimap as a whole, which we haven't got, to be able to select the sector and then obviously update the slate, because the slate again is all coded and works for our particular sector, but we have to retie all that up based on our new minimap, based on our new data that we have. But with the updated data and the updated minimap, it does feel like the components are kind of fitting together better. They know more completely about what they represent. So the minimap really doesn't need to know anything more about the sector than what picture to show, in terms of displaying the map. And then we've got in the map, we've got whether a player has a castle or multiple players has an army on those individual sectors that we have to account for. But they're just additional images basically on top of the images that are already there. So I think we've got the on mouse button down for the maps that we can do to interact with them. But there is actually other interactions that you can do from the minimap. You can actually, while you're in game, I think you can move armies using the minimap. It's quite a convenient thing. So the mouse button down is actually not going to be good enough, just on its own, because I think that's the one. Oh no, we can determine right click, so maybe it's not going to be so bad. You just can't do the kind of click and hold type interaction. But it's going to be quite heavy if we have a on image X mouse button down function for every one of them. So maybe there's a better way to do that. But again, task for another day. So I think that's worked out quite well. We've got much more of the data in. Still not 100%, but getting there. And now we're actually using that data in a really clean way, to take from the level object, our level blueprint, having an island, pushing that all the way to the minimap, and soon it will be pushed to the menu, so the menu can display the correct text just between the minimap and the actual menu itself. And we even know, although not using, what research is available on this particular section or sector and what resources are available. So they're things that we will certainly work on soon. So yeah, that's all I'm going to do today. Thanks for your help, Dirt Sleeper. Those two things definitely saved me a bit of time. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you again soon. So I hope to see everybody again soon. So that's all for now. Good night.